Awesome, recording our final Zoom session for posterity and for those who can't make it. So they have access on the Moodle later on. So welcome everyone. So just to kick off this session to start with, we do design our training to be like as impactful as possible and for you guys to really take something and be able to use it, in real life and make it as applicable as possible. So I just wondered if I could throw something to you as to, is anyone, can you tell me what's the most interesting thing that you managed to learn from our course over these last 3 modules? As a little bit of instant feedback for me. Anyone want to pop their hand up? It's a deathly silence.
Or you can put it in the chat.
Yeah, feel free to oh, Kelvin. So feel free to, yeah, as Rosie said, put it in the chat. Or,
I think I've learned quite a lot, but one thing that has stood out for me is its practical applicability in our various projects. Like right now, we're attending a workshop while looking at the management planning for the Kafia flats, and things that we're looking at are things like the long-term impact for the project. We're looking at indicators, we're looking at short-term impacts, we're looking at theory of change, something that we've been learning and we're now applying it directly to the project. So it's really something that has benefited me greatly, and it has really come at the right time where what we're doing now, it's being applied on. So I really, really appreciate this course. It's a very good course.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kevin. And the theory of change, we're finding this is really a useful thing for a lot of people because it's quite often a new concept. People have heard of log frames, but the theory of change. So I'm really pleased that you're finding that useful. So welcome, Tendai. Hi. So we're just getting a little bit of quick feedback from you guys about the most interesting thing that you've learned from the last 3 modules on this course. Have you got anything to share with us there, Tendai, as you just jumped in?
Thanks, Gav. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I was a bit late. I think for me, it was all 3 of them, because I think for me, it's a bit of, I just jumped into a role that required me to have this experience and I didn't. So it's been an issue of learning on the job. And I think this course was perfect for me. It came at the right time. And from the very beginning, nothing was too small or too big. So almost everything that I learned played a role. And now, to be honest, like if we're in similar meetings, people are now actually asking, Tendai, do you have anything to add? Because I have something to add. So it's been really helpful and I've gained so much knowledge, and I think it was really nicely set up. And the tasks, I know there were others I couldn't do on time, but then when I did them later afterwards, then I'll be like, oh, this is really good. And then your comments as well, they were really good and appropriate. And like I said, nothing is too small or too big. Everything for me was really invaluable and I really appreciate it. And I had fun. Yeah, thanks.
Excellent. Thanks very much. And having fun, that's the key, I think, to any sort of learning. If we can make it fun and engaging for you guys, that's made me happy. Hi, John, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, John.
Hi, so we're just having a quick little bit of feedback from you guys about the most interesting or useful thing that you've learned over on this course so far. Maybe we'll jump to Vela. Something to add there. Over to you.
Yes, Kevin. So for me, I would also say that this course has come at the right time. And it has helped me a lot, all the 3 modules. There's another course that I'm taking, and it's about, it's called Prince 2. So it's about projects in controlled environments. So the course is more general. It's not aligned to any specific sector. So it doesn't have any knowledge or information on training on environment and conservation. So this course has added on to that other course because it has been like a specialist course delving into the area of interest, the area of environment that I'm interested in. And one of the things that I realized, especially with regard to the second module, when we are talking about the logical frameworks, I've had all the terms that we have been talking about during this course, but it has never occurred to me that all these come up together to form the theory of change. So this has been quite interesting, I would say. And the third module is very new to me. So I have learned a lot, things that I knew and things that I didn't know as well.
Excellent, brilliant. I'm really glad that you're finding it applicable and some new stuff there. So, Lara.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's been really useful to help me think. And I found, because you do log frames and people always correct you, because I use it a lot, but you never really understand why you got it wrong, which I always do. So it was really useful to have some comments and feedback.
Excellent, thanks very much. Yes, log frames. They're interesting, but I'm glad you found it applicable and that we can, yeah. So we do try to sort of tailor this as much to you guys as possible. So it's really nice to hear that for us.
Yeah, that's one reason we did this, because although everything we're teaching is actually transferable skills, so you really could apply it to anywhere, but we wanted to hook it to conservation and environment because we felt that very few other courses do that. So it's interesting to hear that seems to be working.
Awesome. Anybody else? We've got quick time for one more person to offer a little bit of feedback about how this might be the most interesting bit that they've learned from this course so far.
Okay.
Hi, Tobias.
Just a second. Sorry.
Looks like you're being chased around the room.
It looks like you've got a theory of change on your wall behind you.
Yes, we've been doing it quite a lot, and it's something that I've learned. And from this course, what I can say is that I've actually gained a lot in terms of how to communicate impact and even just how to measure impact and even do conservation projects. So I'm learning, and I hope that maybe I haven't been having enough time to at times finish my assignments on time, but I've learned a lot more so on impact assessment and even just to do how to share, like how the different stages in starting a project. And I believe that from this, I'm going to be much better, and I'm going to be able to design several or even just complete the first project within either this year, because I've been having challenges with writing proposals, and because I always have a problem with designing activities and how to designing most of the activities. So yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Excellent. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Awesome. Well, it's really pleasing to know that we can transfer some of our face-to-face to this online. Although we're planning to get back to face-to-face one day. So thanks very much for all of those comments. So talking of feedback, I think I'll hand to Rosie to continue the next part of the session and give a little bit more feedback about the previous module.
Thank you. So yeah, glad, and that was very useful to hear. We're as Kev said, we tailor our courses to the people who join them. And so it's really important that we're meeting the right targets ourselves, because we also do adaptive management. But we have learned that actually doing online courses has advantages over face-to-face courses. So it's not a replacement, it's actually a different course. And we've actually managed to do more in some areas by going online. So that's been really useful for us as well. So it's not an instead of, or second best. It's actually you just design the course differently. And actually in some areas we've been able to achieve more. So I thought I'd give some very quick feedback on the tasks that you did. I mean, obviously you've all had personal feedback. Tobias, I sent yours this morning. Hope you've got it. So I'm going to share some feedback using some slides as a prompt. But as you know, the purpose of this Zoom is also to give you a chance to do question and answers. So we're going to have a question and answer session after this, but actually if they come up while I'm talking, just please ask the questions. So this is now, this whole Zoom is going to be interactive for you. So I will do some feedback for you, but as I do so, do stop me if you want to ask any questions. Okay. So the first thing is congratulations. It's wonderful that to see you, not only to get this far all the way through the course, that's brilliant. To see you back on our Zoom, that's wonderful. And then all the tasks that you did and that Kev and I looked at, that we were really impressed with them actually. They were really good. And I think you all met this challenge really well. And the challenge is to take a theory of change, which is kind of quite a complicated map of what you're going to do and where you want to get to. And it's often quite messy. This one is obviously very neat because it's been published, but your real theories of change that you do, maybe on the wall behind Tobias, that's quite messy, and you're trying to capture the real world. And then, of course, you've got to put into a log frame, into this kind of very strict kind of linear table. And that's quite a challenge. And I thought, although we didn't ask you to do the whole log frame, I thought you did that really well, because essentially you did this part of it, which is, the really key part. So you translated a kind of a much more visual, messy, real world picture into how you think everything's going to link into a table, and particularly looking at your indicators to measure those impacts and outputs. So I thought that was really good. I thought what worked well was you all came up with indicators. That was the task that you had, and we thought in general they were kind of sort of appropriate and measurable, because I think it's easy in a log frame to make it too hypothetical, because you think, well, somebody's asked me to do a log frame, I've got to do it for my proposal, I've got to get it right. And Lara was talking about right, and often there isn't one right answer actually, but there may be a right answer for the funder you're writing to, but the real right answer is, does that indicator really measure what you are aiming to do? What will it tell you? Will it tell you the things you need to know? And I thought that you all had thought about that really well. I thought a few challenges that I think we all come up with, however often we do log frames, and perhaps in some of yours, was this idea of sort of checking the log frame logic. So we use this example, I think, in ours. The Wartes wetlands are restored and are sustainably managed. Say that's your long-term impact. So what if you put this as a short-term impact? Fishing communities with alternative livelihoods. A lot of us do alternative livelihoods. So I don't know, what does anyone think about that? What do you think the problem with that is? I'm checking the logic. Is that a logical, can I go logically and easily from my short-term impact to long-term impact? What does anyone think?
It's quite a big jump from the short-term impact to the long-term.
Yeah, it's a really big jump. And that's the problem, I think, with a log frame, is because, you have to kind of distill your whole project into it. We do ask for long-term impacts because that's your rationale for the project. That's why is it important. But I agree. I think it's too much of a big jump, and perhaps not a logical connection, because the long-term impact mentions restored wetlands. So restoration is in there, isn't it? And sustainable management. Whereas actually your short-term impact is about people with alternative livelihoods. So you probably need a few more steps in there to get to, why will the alternative livelihoods lead to sustainably managed wetlands. Perhaps it's because they do less illegal fishing. And will the fishing communities restore wetlands because of their alternative livelihoods? Well, only if maybe their alternative livelihoods are around planting trees on the wetlands or something. So there's too many leaps, there's too many steps to get there. So that's what we mean by check your log frame logic. So here's supposing you then said, well, fishing communities with greater awareness as an output. Again, I think you'll note that that's actually a big leap as well. Why or how will greater awareness lead to alternative livelihoods? That's another big leap. So it's not necessarily that it's wrong, it's that you need some intermediate steps. And I think the other thing is that I would always suggest that when you talk about awareness, I would be really clear in your mind about, well, awareness about what and how will that lead to something else? I mean, awareness is just a kind of, it's not necessarily a skill. It could be, changing an attitude or something. But we all know that even if attitudes or intentions change, action doesn't change. So I think whenever you think about outputs around, you've improved awareness or something, I would really ask myself, well, but what do I want people to do with that awareness? What will they do next? So again, there isn't really a logical connection there either. You could have awareness as an output, but then your short-term impact needs to be something else, that maybe people do actually start managing their environment more sustainably. So what I'm showing is that there's these kind of little blocks of things that on their own aren't incorrect, but perhaps one does not lead to the next. And that's the same if it's a theory of change or a log frame. And then again, obviously people often do training workshops, but in this case, what was your training workshop doing? Is awareness raising enough for a workshop? Or perhaps would you need skills around something? And if you think as far as if it's your short-term impact, well, it's alternative livelihoods. So you'd want your training workshops to be all around alternative livelihoods, because that's where you want to aim to get to. So if you had your short-term impact then, which is your project, remember, it's fishing communities with alternative livelihoods, then you want to think of everything that will lead to that. So everything below your table needs to really lead to that. So in this case, I've made it more kind of, I've given more detail. I think people often didn't give enough detail. So in my short-term impact, they've adopted alternative livelihoods and they've reduced illegal fish catches. And so I've made it clear what the link between alternative livelihoods is and my environment, because alternative livelihoods on their own is a good short-term impact. There's nothing wrong with it. If you're doing it because you want some kind of conservation impact, you might want to put that in as well. And there's nothing wrong with having more than one indicator for your short-term impact. So in this case, we've suggested that by adopting alternative livelihoods, you're getting reduced illegal fish catches because people are managing to have a sustainable, support their livelihoods without having to do illegal fishing. That's perhaps the aim. And then your output might be, from your workshop, might be that the fishing communities have the skills to adopt these alternative livelihoods. And then your training workshops, okay, it hasn't said what it does, but it's going to be giving them those skills. So I've used sort of, a cartoon project, but I hope you can see that all I've done is really, I've given a bit more detail and I've kind of aligned everything much more. And that's probably what you wanted to do anyway. So some of it is about communication. I mean, it's a communication exercise, but some of it is, if someone else is going to read it and they're not part of your project, they've got to understand why you're doing this training workshop. Where's it going to lead to? And how does it lead to that short-term impact, which is the real conservation change you want to see happening? So I've added a bit more detail and I've connected things much closer together.
Can I jump in there, Rosie, just quickly?
Yeah, because I can't see the chat, so do.
Cool. So I've got a really nice question from David.
Yeah.
So are the assumptions around these based on project elements or indicators or the methods of verification? So which column in the log frame do assumptions speak to?
Okay, that's a good question. I mean,
good question.
Yeah. So the assumptions speak to. I agree. I think the assumptions really speak to this column, which is because this is about what you're really going to do. So the means of verification is going to. Your indicators are, you know, your measures of success. Your means of verification are your methods. What methods are you going to use? Is it questionnaires, or is it? We've just heard people going to survey cranes, and they're probably going to use transects. That's your methods. So your assumptions really are very much focusing on, will this really work? So these green arrows you can see here, will this work? Will each of these blocks work? That's really what your assumptions are on, because you've made a logical connection, but you're going to have some assumption there somewhere, aren't you? I mean, in this case, you're going to have assumptions that perhaps that the fishing communities, you know, are willing and able to adopt alternative livelihoods. So, you know, you're that's quite a big jump in their activities. Perhaps you might need an assumption that even in terms of illegal fish catches, perhaps you might want to assume that the local government or authorities or legislation is kind of supporting you on this. So the assumptions really are about, it's really about these steps in your logical framework and about the individual boxes. So we're assuming that the fishing communities are going to be willing and able, they're committed perhaps to adopting these alternative livelihoods.
Hope that answers your question, David. I've got another one come in.
Excellent.
It might need a little bit more elaboration. I'm not quite sure, but it's from Lara. How do you avoid having too many strategies? I think I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
So, because obviously each time you break down your strategies and results chains, and I know you mentioned, Rosie, before, like even health and environment can be broken down further. And we do have a very broad project, and because we're trying to rethink the project, like I find myself trying to coagulate strategies to make it less.
Yeah.
And then to be accurate, you need to go down level, and then you just end up with hundreds of them. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I mean.
I totally get what you mean, and actually I think what I might do is sort of finish this line, and then we'll have some question and answers, and I'll dig out a slide that I think might help. But I totally agree, and actually I think that what we're giving you is some tools to use. The reason we put log frames in this teaching is because, as you all know, it's useful. It's a way of putting a theory of change, which is on somebody's wall, into a document you can share with people. And funders often ask for it because it's a snapshot of your whole project. But in your case, it might be that a more sort of organized theory of change might be more helpful, because then you can follow the results chain along from each of your strategies. So you've got a livelihood strategy, you can follow that one along. Then you've probably got a restoration, I can't remember what your other strategy is, or crane conservation or something. That could go along another strand of your theory of change, and then it's easier to link them up with your little arrows. And I think that's very difficult to do in a log frame. So you could end up, if you've got different strategies, you may just end up having a separate mini log frame for each strategy, because I think what you're saying is that, and you've probably seen these log frames, or you've done them, where you have, impact 1 and then output 1.1, output 1.2, and impact 2. And by the time you've gone down the whole table, you could get a bit lost. So it's sometimes easier, I think, to have a kind of a clean sort of a theory of change way of showing what your strategy is, and possibly then having each strategy has its own sort of implementation or strategic plan, as it were. I think that might make it easier, because a log frame doesn't really show these interdependencies so well, does it? We've kind of, it's very kind of logical and linear, and we know that life isn't logical and linear. So it might be a theory of change way of is more easy. We could return to that a bit later, Lara.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll move quickly on. Well, so in this case, what I've done is I've focused on our short-term impact. So now we need a long-term impact. So what would be the long-term impact of this? It probably wouldn't be the Wote wetland restored. It would probably be something that's more immediate to the fact that you've reduced illegal fish catches. Communities have alternative livelihoods. So you'd now want a long-term impact that fits better with that. I'm going to move on, and we can come to this later, and people can put it in the chat actually if they could think of a long-term impact for this. Because although we've said the long-term impact is beyond your project, it's your vision, it still has to be, you still have to be able to see a connection between the two, and and that's to do with the scope of the project, which I'll talk about a bit later. But if you did have the wetlands restored and sustainably managed as your long-term impact, that really is where you want to go, then you could think of, well, what would my short-term impact for that be? So then it could be something around riparian habitat being restored as one of your impacts. You could then have another impact around livelihoods. There's nothing wrong with that. But I was just going to use one that's very direct to the restoration part. And then you could say, well, my output would be that riparian communities have established nurseries and they're doing a tree planting program, for example. And your activity would be agreeing to nursery protocols. And obviously you could have training workshops. And I'm just doing this as a cartoon. But you can see now how those logical links are much tighter. They're much closer together. And I've given a bit more information. I think in log frames and so on, you don't have to write beautiful English. You just have to get the information in there. Okay, I think we've probably had quite enough of log frames, but we can definitely have more questions about them. And Kev and I have put lots of comments on your log frames that you sent us. I mentioned just now about the project scope, so the length of time and so on. And that, in other words, that top bit of your log frame or the right-hand bit of your theory of change, how big are you going to go with your project scope? Kev, do let me know if there's questions coming in still, because I can't see the chat. And you'll remember this diagram from our Moodle, in that if this is a cartoon theory of change. Real theories of change have a lot more boxes than this. But this is your project up to the short-term impact. Some people call them outcomes. That's your project. And therefore, you're going to do that according to the time you have and the capacity you have, the time and scope. So if it's a 2-year project, your short-term impacts are going to be, quite modest. If it's a 10-year project, they're going to be much bigger. So you could imagine sliding your outputs along to the right and your short-term impacts along to the right or along to the left, depending on what your project in your time frame is going to do. And actually, many of you in your log frames didn't give us your time frame. Obviously, you know what the time frame is. So I'll illustrate this a little bit here. You could imagine that this short-term impact here is just too big for your time and scope. It's something that you're just not going to see in your 3-year project. So that might end up being more of a long-term impact. And then you can think of, as I said, you'd kind of move your output along to the right and you'd put in another short-term impact there. So every project is going to be different, and it's your project, and you need to think of what is my time frame for this particular one. And that will help you know how far to the right you go or how big your long-term impact is in your log frame. I think I'm going to stop there because I think, I'll very quickly, I was going to do a very, very quick note on, many of you used indicators of numbers or percentages in your log frames. And I just thought I'd give you some thoughts and reflections on when you might and might not want to use these. So here's an example. Supposing I say 60% of the forest is restored. What does that mean to you? What does that tell you? Does it tell you how big your project is? the thing about percentages, it doesn't give you any context. How do I know how much 60% is? So what if it's 30 hectares out of 50 hectares of a forest? That is 60%. So it could be a really small, 60% could be like it could be 2 people only, but it's still a percentage, right? If 50%, if I have 2 people, I could have, and I train 1 person, I've trained 50% of my target, but that's only 1 person. So the percentage doesn't always, it's a good thing to think about because it gives you an idea, well, what's realistic? Could I do 60% of my forest? But you could, in this case, you could say, well, okay, 300 hectares out of 500 hectares, maybe that's bigger. So my point there is you need a context. So what you could actually say is you're going to restore 60% of the remaining 500 hectares of forest. So we've got a context to know, is 60% big or small? You could actually just say 300 hectares of forest restored. So you don't always have to do a percentage. Percentages don't give you the context you need. They can do because you can write it in such a way. So if you give a percentage, think about what does that mean to the reader? And perhaps why not put a context in instead? Okay, I think I'm going to stop there, and because I'm sure there'll be other questions, and there are more questions in the chat box, and you may have questions from what I've just said, but also this is the time, as you know, to really ask questions about your own work, anything we commented on your tasks, anything in the Moodle that didn't make sense, or anything that you'd like to know now about your project. This is your chance. And we've got Frederick, how to prioritize short-term impacts that best deliver the desired long-term impact. Okay, so Frederick, why don't you, perhaps you can expand a bit more on that, if your internet will allow. Tell us what the issue is about your particular project.
Thank you. My particular project is the restoration of Mount Elgon National Park Forest. And I happen to have had several short-term impacts, but in my realization is that there appeared to be many impacts, so that in order to achieve the overall desired long-term impact. Yeah. And if I miss out one, I may not achieve my desired objective. So I saw that this would become eventually rather more expensive than what it could be. So that's why I'm asking whether there is a way of prioritizing the best impact, short-term impact to take, so that I can concentrate and I achieve the objective. Yeah,
no, that's a great question, Frederick. I remember your project. So, I mean, on the one hand, you could flip it the other way and say, is your desired long-term impact too big?
Yeah. Yes.
Right? Because restoring a whole ecosystem of Mount Elgon so that it's fully functioning, the biodiversity is there, people's livelihoods are there. That's a wonderful long-term impact, but it's huge. So you might so you might end up saying sort of you might end up saying, well, obviously our big final conservation goal is that Mount Elgon is restored and biodiversity is functioning, people are benefiting. That's your big long-term goal. But you might then just say, okay, for my project, my long-term impact is this. So I've kind of cheated and I've added another layer onto your theory of change. So that would be one way of looking at it. But the other way would be that of course, we know that our long-term impact, we are not going to achieve it on our own in our 5 years or 10 years. It's always beyond that. In which case, I think you can say, as long as what I showed you just now, that in that log frame, that your short-term impacts are totally relevant to that long-term impact that you've now desired. So you might make your long-term impact a little bit less huge, and then you say, right, I still want to be able to be contributing towards that. So all my short-term impacts need to be completely relevant to that. But you can put short-term impacts together if you want. Sometimes, I mean, you probably noticed I did that on the fishing communities one. So you can kind of merge them together. you can have more than one indicator for a short-term impact.
Okay.
Because by the time you get to a short-term impact level, you know, you're already at the kind of impact level of your project. So it might be unlikely you can have one indicator for your one impact. You might have two. So I wouldn't be too, I think, don't be too restrained by this log frame kind of boxing approach. And then I would say that, again, it's a bit like I just showed you in that log frame analogy I showed. Does every short-term impact lead towards that long-term one?
Exactly. Yeah.
Or are you missing one out? If your long-term one was really about livelihoods, or it really was about a forest restored, then that's your long-term impact. Then for sure, your short-term impacts have to be around restoration and livelihoods, because you've said those are the two big things you're working towards.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Thank you.
Samuel, may I know the role of project objectives, strategies, and targets in the log frame? Okay. Samuel, do you want to expand a bit more on your question?
Oh, yes, I can. Thank you very much for today's lesson. I shared with you that inquiry because having previously interacted with the other planning tools, the Mirati standards, plus others making of strategic plan, etc. We've often interacted with those terminologies, objectives, strategies, targets. Yeah, indeed being included in the log frames.
Yes.
So I'm wondering where we place those terminologies in this framework that you've shared with us or told us. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. What I'm going to do is shortly is put up a Mirati log frame. Sorry, a theory of change. So to answer your question, okay, to answer your question, first of all, there's terminology, which I think we showed at the end of we showed during our Moodle that, okay, let me rewind. Mirati, for those of you who don't know, is a community of practice and a tool that wanted to put all theories of change into the same format, because then you can actually communicate across the world, you can compare them with each other. And so they wanted to use this one format of a theory of change. Now, not everyone uses it because not everyone has found it to really work in what they're doing. Because, I mean, it's like anything, it kind of boxes you into a certain way. But it's very good because it makes you think very well about your project. It makes you think about the threats. You remember from your problem trees, the threats and how you're going to reduce those threats. The first thing then to tell you is, to remind you all, is that people just use different terms. So Mirati uses terms, we've been using terms, things like short-term impact, whereas Mirati has come up with terms like threat reduction outcome, intermediate outcome, and then activities and outputs. But essentially, if you think of your logic, you can work out what they mean. We know activities, we know outputs. Intermediate outcomes could be your short-term impact. And then the impact on biodiversity or the threat reduction outcome would be your long-term impact. So number one, it's purely about terminology. That's why I like a theory of change. Imagine you just took the labels off your theory of change. Take the labels at the top off. You can still have a really good theory of change that starts from the activity and goes all the way to whatever you want to call your conservation success. It doesn't matter what you call them. It's what you're going to do and how one leads to the other, leads to the other. Now, the problem with that log frame, though, and it's like the log frame I actually showed you in my slide share, is you still have to put that into a log frame. And that makes it more difficult because a log frame will sometimes give you the titles in those rows. So you don't have any choice. If you're doing your own log frame, then you can design it according to the Mirati theory of change you've done. So you could just put it in a log frame, but using your Mirati levels that you've used. So the log frame is a tool theory of change is a tool. What you call the items, the elements, is up to you. How many you have is up to you. And if it's your own log frame, you could take your theory of change that you've done and you put it into your own log frame. And even Lara, you could do that with yours as well, your strategy. I mean, we gave you a template. It's a typical log frame a funder will use, but it's got to be useful for you. So you could make your own log frame and you could add more levels in there. And in fact, the Meradi community do that. So they have an Excel sheet where you fill in, as you probably used it, you fill in all your different levels to make your theory of change. So that it's a tool that there's no, one is not more right than the other. You've got to choose a tool that will work for you. I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, sure. Yes, you did. Thank you.
Just a quick out of interest, does anyone else use this Meradi system at all from out of you guys who are currently in our Zoom? Maybe I could say raise your hand, give me a user reaction. Okay. Got 3. Oh, it's just out of interest.
That's useful.
Yeah, so we all work for the same organization. So
yeah.
Okay, similar things.
Maybe I'll just to help everybody who is not can everyone see that? This is a very simple Meradi tool where you have your different levels of color coded. So on the right you have something around biodiversity. On the left you have your activities. Actually, yep. So that wasn't a very. Does that make sense to you who've used it, or do you need a more do you need more explanation?
I mean, I would, because it is terminology, and I get so confused because then you've got your Meradi terminology, and then you've got your whichever funding proposal terminology, and you're like, what do you actually want to know?
Yes. Which is why, as I said, I would always say, if with my team, I would use no terminology to start with. I would, because it's not the terminology that matters, it's your strategy, your thinking. How are you going to, what do you want to achieve? Don't just call it whatever you want to call it. What do you want to achieve? And then how will you get there? And then I do agree that different funders use different terminologies, and we've been, we've been fighting against that forever, but I don't know how to change it, because once people have stuck with the terminology, they're stuck with it. But I think the most important, that's why I like a theory of change, because, or even a log frame, that column of the log frame, you can call it whatever you want. You can see that the thing at the top is your big picture and the thing at the bottom is your activities. And I would focus on your project first, and then you can fit it into what you want to call it later. And we do, I think you'll remember in our Moodle, we give a little translation table where we show, if you all remember that, I think it's in module 1 or 2, and we do a little table, and it essentially shows, I can probably show you now. It basically says, here's a little note on language. So you can see the green on the top is your big picture. Some people call it long-term impact, some people call it impact, some people call it goal, but it's at the top. And then one layer down in yellow is your short-term impact, that's your project. Some people call it an outcome, some people call it a purpose. But you can see that as you go down this table, you're going down the hierarchy. So as long as you keep your hierarchy correct, it doesn't matter what you call it until you're writing to to a funder, in which case you're going to have to use their terms. But if I were you, if you get a funder's terms, I would draw a table like this, use whatever terminology you're using, and then just fit the funders in, because it's all about hierarchy. And there's plenty more terms. I've just chosen some two very common ones. Miradi uses slightly different, as you know, a slightly different one. In fact, I think I can show you, because I put it at the top, at the there. That's the Miradi one. And as you can see, what they have is activity in the left, yellow is outputs, and then they have intermediate outcomes in blue. And notice there's several of them. Then they have a threat reduction outcome. So it's very specific. What threat have you reduced? And they want to have that. That's in pink. And then in green is the wonderful end conservation success story around biodiversity. So that's Miradi. And it's no more different than what you've all done in your course with us just now. We just didn't call it those terms, but the process is exactly the same. And we just didn't say specifically focus on calling it a threat reduction, but many of you are doing threat reductions because you want to reduce threats. You're reducing poaching, you're reducing poisoning. So you are actually you're all doing the same thing. It's a matter of terminology. So we haven't done. Oh, sorry, Lara. I just want to quickly. Yeah. Sorry, go on, Lara. Do you have a quick comment about that? Otherwise, I'm going to go to Kelvin.
Yes. No, it was just like the green outcome and the yellow, the orange, whatever strategy.
Yeah.
Like, I often get muddled up which way we're going, because like a strategy is the end result, like, or kind of, well, it's not, but so you want restored wetlands so that there's more breeding sites.
Yeah, the idea of sorry, go on.
The strategy then would be to restore wetlands. It's kind of
yes. So sometimes it's a bit repetitive. I agree. Yeah. And the idea of thinking of strategy is again to try and focus people on your project should only do what it needs to do in order to achieve your kind of, say if it's about wetlands or something, it's making you focus, because most projects have different strands to them. So it's making you focus on what actually do you need to do to get to that last green blob. And if it's something else, then that's another strategy. It's another kind of project. I mean, so many of them are trying to force people to think in a way because they think that will help you. But if it doesn't help you, then I would follow your own, because what you're doing is really well good. All the log frames we saw that you submitted to us were good. I mean, we've suggested changes, but they're right. They were good. So I just think I wouldn't worry so much about it. And if there is a bit of repetition, then that's fine, because you're just, being strategic is good, but having a strategy it's a way of just focusing your thoughts around that particular part of the project. I would say, yeah, and don't be confused, because we've all seen, every one of you put in your theory of change and log frame. All your tasks you've done have been good. I promised to go back to the Kelvin question. Kelvin was brilliant because he posted something in the discussion forum. I don't know how many have managed to go into the discussion forum, but your project's aimed at addressing wildlife poisoning, particularly that of cranes and water birds. I'd like to find out if my short-term impacts and long-term impacts are good enough to address the problem. Kelvin, I think you can answer that. Do you think they're enough to address the problem? Now that we've gone in quite a lot of detail about log frame logic, theory of change, do you think they're enough to address the problem? Or are you missing anything out?
I think they're good enough, but I wanted to get a second opinion. If I maybe quickly show what I've put across, maybe.
Yeah. because we commented on your theory of change on your log frame, right? In the Moodle.
Yes, but I didn't get enough comments, I think, in the discussion forum.
In the discussion forum. Yeah, I agree. I think we should all participate more in the discussion forum. I thought I'm looking up your I'm looking it up right now. So you had a thing around poaching, but as well as poisoning. Oh, is poaching via poisoning? Is that how people are doing it?
Yes, it has emerged as a means of poaching now, where they're targeting the waterbeds, and cranes are actually a victim of the poisoning. Yes.
My quick comment would be, and it's for any one of you, all of you who are working on things like you're hoping to encourage people to change behavior. Changing people's behavior, as we all know, is long term, and it requires a really good understanding of people's motivations. And you've kind of got you've kind of approaching it in two different ways. One is through enforcement. So you're gonna just arrest people. You're gonna do patrols and do arrests, and that was your one option of reducing poaching. So you're changing behaviour through enforcement, and you've suggested a 25% increase in poaching arrests and fines by year one. I mean that's a lot. In 1 year, you're going to increase it by 25%. Although, as I said earlier, we need to know we don't always know what those numbers are, but you've actually said that every month 15 people are found using poisons. So you're going to arrest 15 people per month. Sorry, in the first year. So that was your enforcement. But you've also you're doing other projects where you're wanting to encourage people that they don't need to poach these cranes, so that they're gonna have better understanding of the environment, perhaps, and perhaps how they benefit from the environment. And also you are going to give them alternative livelihoods like beekeeping. So you've approached it from two directions, which I think is very sensible, because as we all know, often just doing something like enforcement doesn't work if people, if you haven't changed people's motivations or attitudes or even their kind of livelihood position, where maybe they don't have any other choice than to go to poach. So I thought that your project was good because you've got several different ways of approaching the reduction or the poaching of birds. So it's not just enforcement, it's through involving people in the actual, both in the monitoring itself, but also giving people other alternatives as well. So I thought it was good. And as I said earlier, I think the thing to really test yourself is in your mind is, and in reality, go and try it out. If your project doesn't work, then we all know that we change it. We change our project. So forget the log frame. Think of your project. If the project doesn't work because poaching arrest just isn't working, then you're going to have to change it and say, why isn't it working? Is it because we need to work more with the communities to change their attitudes, to provide them alternatives? And so it's the important thing is your project's the important thing. You can always change a log frame. So do adaptive management. So I think my advice would be, I think you've got a nice project, Kelvin, because you're approaching it from two different levels. And the most important thing is, after a year, how well is it working? Are the different elements of this working or not? In which case, do I need to do adaptive management? Shall I adapt now?
Thanks, Rose.
I've got one last quick question you might be able to finish with, actually, which has been sent in by Nanchin via the Moodle. She apologizes for not being here, but she's definitely going to watch this playback. So the question is, how do I come up with smart indicators without them actually sounding like assumptions in my head?
Right.
Thanks for the question, Nanchin.
That's a good question, Nanchin. Yeah, so I think I sort of, I don't really know why I'm answering this, because I bet everybody on the Zoom could answer it as well. I
was going to throw it out to just anyone, but yes.
But I think that this is where I think that indicators we have to make them real. One of the challenges of log frames, for example, is they put everything into a box And they kind of, you have to fill those little boxes in. And sometimes you just feel, I've got to get some right art. It's like doing a maths test or something. I've got to put something in there. But actually, you need to take a step back, and it's your project. And I mean, even we've just heard about Kelvin's arrests. Is that a good indicator? Is number of arrests does a number of arrests tell you that poaching's decreased? What about the people you didn't arrest? Maybe poaching's happening over there on the Kafue flats, but you're not even patrolling that area. So this is where we ask ourselves, and your team, this is where you get the team together, and particularly the communities you're working with, and say, how do I measure this? Is this the right measure? So I think number one would be, what is really the right measure for what I want to, and don't worry about filling it in the log frame. And in a way, SMART, we use SMART as a short term, but you've probably heard me say that the problem with SMART is it has lots of redundancy in it. So I would say, is it good quality indicator? So is number of arrests a good indicator? Is it good quality? I need a time limit on it. I need to know by when I'm expecting this target to have been met. So I need a time, and I need to know, is it a good measure? Can I measure the number of arrests? Probably. Could I measure the number of people actually out there poaching? Maybe I can't, because I can't patrol the entire massive flats around Kafue. So that's where you say you pick a measure that you really can measure, not some hypothetical one. And another way I would say, of testing it in my head, is I would imagine I'm writing myself my report after a year. So what does my report look like? What do my am I going to do a table that says this many arrests, or this many trees surviving? So I actually think in my head, what's it going to look like when I'm writing my report, either to the funder or just to yourself? How am I going to summarize that data? Is it summarizable? Is it presentable? And if it is, you've probably got a good indicator. If it's something you actually can't really measure in any case, then you can't report on it. So that's how I do it. But I don't know if anyone else has any ideas or shares the same issue around when you do indicators. Are they just in your head, or do you feel they're good indicators that you can really use? Anybody else have an answer to Nanchen or some observations?
I mean, I think, when we look at broadscape landscape management, I mean, it becomes almost impossible to get indicators on that. And so one of the things we've been thinking about is, like, can we measure it with remote sensing and that sort of thing? Because it's multiple factors within a catchment that create problems downstream. And so, but then it's like, how do you measure it? And it's not easy.
But I think,
and it's such a fraction of the catchment that it almost feels like nobody would want to fund it.
Well, I don't know. I think people understand that. I think that I think it's kind of the other thing is you said yourself, there's several things. I mean, we don't need one indicator on its own. Probably isn't going to do it, right? So we're going to need a series of indicators. So don't think that with one short-term impact needs one indicator, because it's really unlikely to. So number one, and then number two, it's about, you're the expert. So what makes sense to you, and what is the best way to measure it? And if you're working on if there's a catchment out there, but you're working on a small area of it, fine. You're going to be using proxies. That's why they're called indicators. They're not going to be an absolute measure of what's going on. And then in terms of the funder, then it's about a communication issue. I think you can always persuade a funder this is right, because you're the experts. You know even more than the funder. Maybe you won't tell them that, but you do. So you're the experts. You know these are the right measures because they tell you something, and they tell you how things are progressing, and they're meaningful. And so then your next job is to communicate that to your funder or your stakeholder or whoever, and say, this is why we're doing it. And as I said, imagine presenting your results in a year's time or 2 years' time. And I think that really helps the communication issue. But these have been great questions. Thank you very much. I mean, I hope you can see that there isn't some kind of one right answer out there that you can find in Wikipedia. I think you're in the best position to be doing this, and from what we've seen, you've been doing it really well. You can modify it. We've suggested modifications. Kev, what do you want to add? Anything?
Other than just thanks very much to everyone for all of this, yeah, awesome feedback and responding to what Rosie's been saying. I don't have too much to add on what everyone else has said, really. Unless anyone's got any sort of final questions, I think we'd probably look at wrapping up the session. And I've got a few little bits and pieces just to tidy up the end. But did I just see a hand pop up there and then they disappeared? Greg, did you see that? Tobias, yes, it's popped up again.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask a question. I haven't been able to like fully give the time I wanted to do for the course. After this, like after the last session today, will the course still be available for us? Like, can I be able to go and access the resources there and just recap on what I've been learning? And will I be able to still reach out to TBA or maybe to review, maybe if I'm doing a proposal? Can I reach out to like the team to be able to help me in that?
We're always here.
We are, and some of this is what I was going to wrap up the meeting with, but the answer to your question is yes to pretty much everything you've said there. We will keep the WhatsApp group going, so that's open, so feel free to share whatever you like on there, and that's sort of for everyone to contribute in. So like if you're doing proposals, feel free to use that group, and we can all sort of contribute from TBA as well as everyone else who's in here. As for the Moodle, yes, you will still have access for the next month. So we have to sort of roll over students. So we have to shift you out one day and shift more students in, but you will have access for another month. So I'm going to say until the end of November. So you've got about 5 weeks left to review and do whatever, see all the resources, download whatever. And so, yeah, you still have access to Moodle till the end of November. And you'll be getting another warning from Moodle before then, just to remind you that you've got like a few days left. But feel free to dip into Moodle for as much as you'd like for the moment. Any other, I think that's it, huh? But if there is any other questions that sort of come to you later on, as I've said, the Moodle's still open for the next month for you. So feel free to use the forum, and we promise to respond as soon as possible, and everyone can dip into there and use the WhatsApp group as well. So thanks very much. The final thing I've got is that underneath the task for this last module, I've opened up a feedback area because, as Rosie mentioned before, we do adaptive management. It's fantastic to hear what you guys have learned, but we're also keen to what it's a more intensive, well, not really more intensive, it won't take you too long. There's just some more information that we can use to adapt how we're teaching and make it as relevant as possible. So if you could dip into that and do the feedback, once that has completed, you will be automatically issued with an all singing, all dancing in color, fantastic TBA certificate of course completion, so that you can flash that to whoever you like to let them know that you've attended this course and have some skills and expertise within project management and design. As an incentive to do the feedback for us. Okay, so thank you very much, everyone. Thanks, Tobias. Straight in there with a little emotion. Awesome. Maybe we can just finish off by saying thanks to everyone. Thanks so much to you guys for coming. And maybe we can just switch on our videos and I can do a quick screenshot and share that. We can do a little wave. If you've got video capability, get your best pose.
Brush your hair.
I know, that's the main one for me. I had more of an issue than a lot of other people there, I imagine.
Well, oh, look, everyone's here. Isn't that wonderful to see everyone? It's great.
Excellent, can actually see you all. Awesome, so give us another little wave. Thanks very much. Wonderful. I think I've got it. Okay, thank you so much. Fantastic questions, great feedback. And we wish you all the very best with your projects. And like you say, stay in touch, use the WhatsApp group and the forum in the Moodle.
Yeah, and good luck. I have lots of confidence in your work. All looks really, really good, and also really important. It's important conservation work.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Good
Thank
luck,
you,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Have a
Bye.
good day. Happy Friday.
All the best.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Nice to meet you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, John.
Hi, John. Bye, John. Samuel, Frederick, Richard, Josiah.
Okay.
Greg, can you stop the meeting for us?